Okay, but Rothery is working with this, basically. For literacy teaching, she interpreted this to imply introducing texts and writing texts with students before asking them to write on their own, always in the context of shared understandings of what we've written about. So it's an embedded literacy program. Okay? You have to have field in SFL terms. You have to have something to write about, okay? And you have to share that knowledge before you can concentrate on the organization of the genre. Okay, so you would never ask anyone to write anything before you modeled what it is for them and written one with them. And then, if they're ready, they can write on their own, otherwise recycle. So there were various phases of this. We worked in the linguistics department at the University of Sydney on John Rothery and others' data for some years. Then a local Center for the Disadvantaged Schools program became interested in our work, and our primary school work was developed there, and then we moved into secondary school, but we were never successful in changing secondary school in Australia. It's a much bigger task where you have to change every subject area, and essentially the progressivist constructivist educators stopped us from changing the secondary school. But we were successful in changing primary in Australia and then in many places around the world, including Singapore, I understand. Sorry you can't quite read this. I'm just introducing it because I'll show you a better copy in a moment. It's Rothery's first attempt to design a set of steps based on Halliday Painter's principles, and I introduced it to the Australian Reading Association in 1986. And that's when I became notorious, because I criticized Donald Graves' process writing. He was a great favorite, wonderful, charismatic figure, very influential in Australia. I criticized him. I criticized his notion of text as private property. I was a budding critical discourse analyst, and Shirley Bryce Heath blew up at me after the talk, yelling, screaming at me from the audience. And I've been notorious ever since. That was a real shock to me, what happened. So what I was doing is introducing this alternative to the process writing approach that we were studying. So Rothery has the idea of introducing a genre, modeling it implicitly by reading it to and with the class, focusing on the genre, modeling it explicitly, naming the genre, naming its stages, jointly negotiating a genre. So this is the idea that we have to get the interaction into the pedagogy, so that the teacher in the front of the class on a whiteboard, blackboard, overhead transparency, smartboard, whatever the technology is you're using, wall in Afghanistan where David Rose's people work. Students making suggestions, teacher scribing for the class, commenting as she's scribing. So they're really jointly producing another text, similarly to what we saw with the language learning in the home, the examples we saw earlier. Then researching, you have to build up another field if you're going to write on your own. Drafting, conferencing was the term used in process writing. We were actually preferring consultation. Joan was married to a doctor. We wanted the asymmetry of this interaction, and not just coming and saying, oh, that's wonderful, great, keep going, but trying to teach something, and then the publishing there. Okay, so that was the first step. Then when we moved into the Disadvantaged Schools program, this came to move into one of these teaching learning cycle representations of the curriculum genre, with modeling, joint negotiation of the text, independent construction of text as three main elemental genres in this big macro genre of pedagogy. So we're saying, okay, if we want a genre-based curriculum, we'll need a genre-based pedagogy as well. We can't let the genres be taught traditionally or by progressive pedagogy. We need our own pedagogy. So the steps here become a cycle, partly so the teacher can enter at different points depending on where the students are at. You might be working with a really bright class of middle-class children whose parents are professionals, and you can show them a model of the genre and off they go. Okay, you want to do that. Or you're working with children from different kinds of backgrounds where maybe you need to model, jointly construct, and come back and model again and jointly construct, and maybe not pressure them until they're ready, or some of the class let write and others in a smaller group recycle. Here's another version of it. You'll see it changing in certain respects. One thing you'll notice in here is this wedge coming in called negotiating field. You have to have something to write about. So this is the shared experience notion coming up. All of that early language learning, the extensions in the phonology, the grammar, the text structure are happening in the context of shared experience. So similarly with learning the genres, you need to build up the field, make sure the knowledge is understood, doing all sorts of activities. You want to read or do research, take notes, lecture, go to the library, have field trips, whatever you need to build the field, okay, and then, having built the field, focus on the structure of the text. So this is just to contrast what's going on here. 3 stages, this 4th piece of the pie added there. And by this stage we're working with people, allied actually, with people coming from more a critical theory, cultural studies background. They come into genre through Bakhtin. They are also very disturbed by the elitist, undemocratic nature of the progressivist pedagogy, and we're allied with them, so you see the terminology changing a little bit to reflect this cooperation. And there perhaps is the most canonical model that evolved during our secondary school work. I think the most elegant representation at this stage. It takes the building field from being a wedge and says, no, well, we have to build field at each stage of the pedagogy. You have to build field for the text you're using to model. Then we're going to shift field, shift from sharks to crocodiles, so we have to build information about crocodiles in the joint construction stage, and then we're going to shift fields again, so say they're going to write about dugongs or something. We've got to build field in each stage. And also, important, keep setting the cultural context of the genre at each stage, so the students understand what the purpose of this genre is in the culture, whether we're talking about the culture of the school, for assessment examination purposes, for just understanding what science, what history is, or in the wider community, what the importance is of it there. So certain things become recurring motifs around the pedagogy. Keeping the cultural context of the genres in mind and building field, embedded pedagogy at each stage. In primary school, that's important. You're inserting in Australia into thematic units of work, which might involve several disciplines of building field. In secondary school, hopefully the field is building anyway. You're studying biology, chemistry, mathematics, whatever the field is being built. So be careful to choose the genre that fits the knowledge at that point in the curriculum.